What the hell are you doing to my son? He stood frozen in the doorway, shock etched across his face, his gaze locked on the image in front of him. Maya Williams, the household maid, was cradling his infant son, nursing him. Her blouse was unbuttoned just enough for Bryce to latch on. His small body relaxed in her arms. Her eyes were closed, humming a lullaby, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Arthur's eyes widened, then burned with fury. "You get your hands off my son," he roared, storming into the room. Maya's eyes flew open. Her body tensed as instinct took over. She gently, carefully, detached Bryce from her breast and began to soothe him. "Mr. Moore, please let me explain," she said, her voice trembling. But he wasn't listening. "You think you can just touch my child? Feed him like some damn wet nurse?" Arthur shouted, his voice cracking with rage and disbelief. "This is my son. Who the hell gave you the right?" Maya stood slowly, her arms still around Bryce's tiny form. "I didn't plan it. He hadn't eaten in days. The formula, he kept rejecting it. He was growing weaker. I used to be a neonatal nurse, and I still produce milk." He latched. He needed it. "Shut up," Arthur barked, his fists clenching at his sides. "I only did what I thought was right," she said, a little firmer this time. "He was starving, Mr. Moore. He stopped crying. He stopped moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch him fade." Arthur stepped closer, towering over her. "You crossed a line," he hissed. "You don't touch what's mine. You don't make choices for my family." And without warning, he slapped her a harsh, open-handed blow that sent Maya stumbling sideways. Bryce still clutched protectively in her arms. The nursery fell dead silent. Bryce whimpered. Maya gasped, her hand flying to her cheek. But she didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just stared at Arthur with wide, stunned eyes, then slowly turned her body to shield the child. "How dare you," she whispered. "I saved your son." Arthur's chest heaved. His hand still hung in the air for a moment, as if even he didn't believe what he'd done. "I don't need saving from someone like you," he spat. "Someone like me?" she echoed. Her voice now cut through the air with quiet steel. "You mean black? Poor? A woman?" Arthur flinched but said nothing. "I lost a baby 3 months ago," Maya said, tears burning but not falling. "I held him in my arms as he died. I know what it feels like to be helpless, to watch someone so small slip away while you stand there doing nothing." She took a breath. "I saw that same look in Bryce yesterday, and I did what a mother does. I acted." Arthur turned away, hands raking through his hair. Maya stepped forward, placing Bryce gently in his crib. The baby squirmed once, then stilled, his stomach finally full, his tiny body at peace. "I'll get my things," she said softly. Then she walked toward the door. Arthur didn't stop her, but his hand trembled at his side. The corridor outside the nursery stretched like a tunnel. Maya's heart pounded with every step. Her cheek throbbed, and the echo of Arthur's palm still rang in her bones. But worse than the slap was the hatred in his eyes, the disbelief, as if her humanity had been erased in one moment. She wasn't sure what hurt more, being struck, or being treated like she didn't belong. Down the hall, one of the maids glanced up, startled, but Maya said nothing. She walked past, silent and straight-backed, until she reached her quarters. Inside, she collapsed onto the bed, letting out the breath she'd been holding. Her bag sat in the corner, half-packed since the day she took this job. She stared at it. Maybe she should have left a long time ago. But even now, her arms still felt the weight of Bryce. Her chest still remembered his need. And somewhere beneath the shame and fury, she felt no regret. Back upstairs, Arthur stood alone beside the crib. He looked down at his son sleeping soundly for the first time in days. There was no struggle in the boy's face, no tight fists, no gasping cries. Just peace. Arthur sat down heavily in the rocking chair. His face was pale, his hands shaking. He stared at them, the same hands that once held his wife as she sobbed through postpartum nights. The same hands that today struck the only person who'd made Bryce stop crying. And suddenly, Arthur Moore, CEO, billionaire, widower, felt very, very small. In the stillness, Bryce stirred and let out a tiny coo. Arthur looked toward the door where Maya had walked out and whispered to himself, "What have I done?" Maya sat silently on the edge of her narrow bed, a cracked mirror reflecting her swollen cheek. Her skin stung, but what burned deeper was the humiliation. She'd seen many things in her life: poverty, death, heartbreak, but never imagined being struck for saving a child. Outside, the Seattle sky had turned gray, the kind of overcast that settled like weight on your chest. She looked down at her hands. They still held the warmth of Bryce. She hadn't felt that kind of closeness since Elijah died. A soft knock startled her. It wasn't forceful, more like hesitation wrapped in guilt. She opened the door cautiously. Eleanor Moore stood on the threshold, dressed in a long burgundy housecoat, silver-gray hair pulled into a tight twist, her expression unreadable. In one hand, she held a steaming cup of tea. "May I come in?" she asked, voice even. Maya stepped aside. "Of course, ma'am." Eleanor sat without waiting for an invitation, setting the cup on the side table. Her sharp eyes studied the room, spare, clean, humble. "I was told what happened," she said. "I assumed he'd mention it," Maya replied, her tone restrained. "He didn't." The butler heard the shouting. "I had to ask." Eleanor leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "I saw the look in your eyes last week. The way you held Bryce. You knew something was wrong before any of us did." I used to work in NICU," Maya said softly. "I've seen that kind of hunger before. Babies shutting down. They stop crying when they're too weak." Eleanor nodded. "Arthur's grieving, but that doesn't excuse what he did." "No, it doesn't." For a moment, the two women sat in silence. A strange current passed between them, one not of sympathy, but understanding. Generational, maternal. "You could press charges," Eleanor said. Maya looked at her, startled. "I won't," she said quietly. "He's broken. I know what that feels like." Eleanor let out a slow breath. "You're stronger than most." "I don't want to be," Maya admitted. "I just want to do right." Eleanor's eyes flicked toward Maya's suitcase in the corner. "Are you planning to leave?" "I thought I should," Maya replied. "After what happened, it's clear I don't belong here." Eleanor stood and walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "You saved my grandson. You didn't cross a line, you stepped in where we failed. If you think Maya is a good person, give her a like. And don't forget to let us know where you're watching this video from. Someone nearby might be quietly watching this story along with you." Then she turned back to Maya. "If you leave, it should be your choice, not because a man lashed out in pain." She left without another word. Maya sat back down, heart thudding. Part of her wanted to run, but something deeper whispered, "Stay." Later that morning, Arthur sat alone in his study, surrounded by dark mahogany bookshelves and the ticking of the antique clock above the mantel. He hadn't slept. The slap replayed in his mind again and again. It had been reflex, irrational, ugly, raw. A lifetime of bottled grief had exploded in 1 second. He looked at his reflection in the glass of the liquor cabinet. His face was pale, older than yesterday. The man staring back was a stranger. There was a soft chime. The intercom. "Mr. Moore," came the butler's voice. "Mrs. Eleanor asks that you join her in the conservatory. She says it's urgent." Arthur sighed. "Tell her I'll be there." The conservatory was filled with natural light, an open space of warmth and greenery, far from the cold energy of the rest of the house. His mother stood near the bay window, watching the rain start to patter. "You wanted to see me?" Eleanor turned. "Sit." Arthur obeyed, more from childhood habit than choice. She didn't mince words. "You hit her." Arthur closed his eyes. "It wasn't. I don't want excuses." He looked up at her. "I was scared, Mom. I walked in and you saw your son safe, finally feeding, resting, and you punished the woman who made that possible. She crossed a line. She saved your child." Arthur stared down at his hands. "I don't even know who she really is. She's quiet, keeps to herself. I never even—" "Then maybe it's time you did," Eleanor interrupted. He looked up. "She lost a baby, Arthur. She still produces milk. She's trained, experienced. She did what no one else in this house could do, including you." Arthur's throat tightened. "I made a mistake. Then fix it." That evening, Maya walked into the kitchen to return her uniform. Her contract was hourly, nothing official, nothing binding. Just another name in a long list of help rotating through the Moore estate. She didn't expect a second chance. But when she opened the door to the laundry room, Arthur was there. He looked exhausted, still in his dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, tie loosened. The room felt too small. I was just, Maya began. I know, Arthur said. I wanted to catch you before you left. She said nothing. He looked at the floor, then met her eyes. I'm sorry, he said, for what I said, and what I did. I was furious. Not at you, at myself, at everything I can't fix. Maya's arms crossed, a subtle defense. I didn't do it for thanks, or sympathy. I know, you did it for Bryce. And because that's who you are. A long pause. I want to make this right, Arthur added. I can't change what I did, but I don't want you to go. Maya raised an eyebrow. You're asking me to stay? He nodded. As his caregiver, not a maid, someone we trust. Maya studied him. It won't be easy. Nothing important ever is. I won't take another slap, she said calmly. You shouldn't have taken the first. Another beat of silence. Then Maya sighed. I'll stay for Bryce, but if you ever raise your hand to anyone like that again, I won't, Arthur said. I swear. As she turned to go, she stopped at the doorway. Mr. Moore, she said. Yes? You're not the only one who lost something, but your son still has a chance. Then she left, her step steady, her head high, unaware that in that moment, Arthur Moore realized he hadn't just asked a maid to stay. He'd asked a woman who already knew what it meant to fight for a child. And maybe, just maybe, she'd end up saving more than one. The next morning, Maya moved quietly through the Moore household. The sharp sting on her cheek now faded into a dull ache. The air felt different. Not lighter, but charged, as if something fragile had shifted ever so slightly. She stepped into the nursery just as the first beams of sunlight slipped through the lace curtains. Bryce stirred in his crib, his tiny arms stretching above his head. When he saw Maya, a sleepy smile tugged at the corner of his lips. It was barely a twitch, but it warmed her deeply. Good morning, little man, she whispered, lifting him gently into her arms. She rocked him with ease, humming softly. This time, there was no hesitation. Her touch was sure, her purpose clear. Maya Williams, once a nurse, once a grieving mother, now stood as the unlikely guardian of a billionaire's son. Downstairs, Arthur sat at the breakfast table, his untouched coffee growing cold. Eleanor was already sipping her tea, eyes flicking over the morning paper. The tension between them was quiet, restrained but not invisible. She stayed, Eleanor said without looking up. Arthur nodded. I know. She did it for Bryce, not for you. I know that too. Eleanor folded the newspaper, setting it aside. Don't squander the second chance, Arthur. Not with her. Not with your son. If there's one thing I've learned in 72 years, it's that pride doesn't hold a baby through the night. People do. Arthur didn't answer. His fingers drummed against the ceramic mug. He had built companies on logic, on discipline, on precision. But this fatherhood was chaos he hadn't budgeted for. By mid-afternoon, Maya noticed the change. The housekeepers whispered more than usual. The butler barely met her eyes. One of the maids, Grace, a young woman with soft features and a mean streak, looked her up and down with a twisted smirk. So, Grace said as they passed in the hallway, you're the one who's breastfeeding the billionaire's kid now. Maya stopped. Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around. You know, Grace continued, voice saccharine, I used to think you were just quiet, but now I see it, you're playing the long game, closer to the baby, closer to the will. Clever. Maya turned slowly. Her voice was calm, sharp as glass. If I wanted money, Grace, I'd sue your boss for assault and own this damn house by now. Grace's smile faltered. Maya leaned in just enough for her words to sting. I don't play games with children. And I don't compete with girls who gossip behind closed doors. Then she walked away, but as she turned the corner, something gnawed at her. She hadn't considered how her role would be perceived by the others in the house. The whispers, the stares, they weren't just about race or class. They were about fear. Maya had crossed an invisible line, and in doing so, she'd become a threat. That evening, after dinner, Arthur approached Maya in the hallway outside the nursery. He was dressed casually, no suit, no tie, just a simple button-up and dark slacks. The sharp angles of his face looked softer in the warm hallway light. May I speak with you? He asked. Maya crossed her arms. You're speaking. Arthur exhaled. I've asked a therapist to visit the house. For Bryce. Maybe for me too. Maya raised a brow. That's a start. I also want to formalize your role, not just as a caregiver but as a guardian when I travel. With full rights, medical decisions, emergency protocols, everything. Maya's expression hardened slightly. Why now? Because I saw how everyone looks at you today. Like you don't belong. But you do. Maya shook her head. Belonging isn't paperwork, Mr. Moore. It's earned. I know. That's why I'm asking for your trust. Again. She studied him for a moment. I'll consider it. But not for you. For Bryce. He nodded, swallowing whatever pride he'd held onto. For Bryce. Later that night, Maya stood alone in the garden behind the estate. The city's glow flickered beyond the hills. The wind whispered through the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. She pulled her shawl tighter and closed her eyes. The quiet was broken by soft footsteps. Didn't expect company, she said without turning. Eleanor's voice came gently from behind. You seemed like someone who needed a reminder. Of what? That you're not alone. Maya opened her eyes. It doesn't feel that way. Every look, every whisper, it's like I'm a danger just for existing. You are, Eleanor said bluntly. You're a black woman in a house built by white men with old money. You stepped out of the place they wrote for you. That scares them. So what do I do? Maya asked, her voice tight. You stand tall, you stay sharp, and you don't let them drag you back down. Maya turned to her. Even if it gets worse? Eleanor nodded. Especially if it gets worse. That night, as the house settled into silence, Maya checked on Bryce one last time. The baby slept peacefully, arms spread like angel wings, a soft snore puffing from his nose. She watched him, her heart full of a strange ache, part grief, part purpose. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know how deep the whispers would cut. But she knew this. She was not going anywhere. Not yet. Not while this child still needed her. And not while the truth still waited to be uncovered behind every stare, every whisper, every shadow in tea morning in the Moore household came with orchestration. The hum of the espresso machine downstairs, the rustling of newspapers in the drawing room, the measured clatter of polished shoes against marble. But Maya, now assigned as Bryce's full-time caregiver, had learned to move in silence. Her world was timed to the rhythm of a baby's needs, not the rituals of wealth. Bryce giggled from his playpen in the conservatory, his tiny fingers gripping a plush giraffe. Maya watched him with a quiet smile, crouched beside him, holding a soft cloth in one hand and his milk bottle in the other. He had grown stronger, brighter. His once tired eyes now followed her every movement. Good morning, sunshine, she whispered, brushing his curls. The sliding glass door behind her opened with a soft whoosh. Arthur entered, tablet in hand. He hesitated at the threshold, watching his son with a look somewhere between awe and regret. Bryce squealed at the sight of him and reached up. Arthur crossed the room, crouched down, and lifted the boy with both arms. Hey, buddy. You sleep well? Bryce burbled happily, his chubby hands patting Arthur's collar. Maya stood slowly, watching them. He's gaining weight, she noted. His appetite's consistent now. Arthur nodded. That's your doing. Thank you. Maya simply inclined her head, then turned to gather the toys scattered on the floor. She didn't need praise. She needed consistency, safety, and answers. Listen, Arthur said, as Bryce cooed in his arms. I want to show you something. After his nap, she looked at him cautiously. Show me what? Arthur hesitated. Something I should have looked at a long time ago. 3 hours later, after Bryce had been rocked into a deep sleep, Maya followed Arthur down a long, dim hallway lined with dusty portraits. He led her into his late wife, Claire's private study, untouched since her death. It was a room filled with warmth, yellow curtains, worn books, pictures of family moments frozen in time. Arthur walked to the far cabinet and unlocked it with a brass key. He pulled out a black leather ledger, thick with years of receipts, letters, and scribbled notes. This was Claire's, he said, laying it flat on the desk. She kept track of everything, every donation, every check, every caregiver application. She was meticulous. Maya stepped forward slowly. Why are you showing me this? Arthur flipped to a bookmarked page. Because 2 days before she died, she wrote your name down. Maya blinked. What? Arthur nodded. I didn't even know she'd met you. Maya took a breath. I never met her formally. I applied for a nurse position through a referral service. They said the family had already hired someone. I never heard back. Arthur pointed to a sticky note, faded with time. Maya Williams, calm eyes, carries pain, could be the one. He looked up. She saw something in you. And now I'm wondering if she saw what I didn't. Maya ran her fingers lightly over the page. She must have interviewed me when I brought Elijah to the clinic. Arthur furrowed his brow. Your son? Maya nodded. He was sick. I didn't have insurance. A woman came to the waiting room. She sat beside me, talked to Elijah, asked about my life. She never gave her name. Arthur sank into the chair behind the desk, his voice hoarse. That was Claire. She did that kind of thing. Disguised kindness. Anonymous charity. Silence fell between them as both tried to connect the invisible threads that now stretched backward through time. Then Maya asked, "Why now?" Arthur closed the book gently. "Because I think Claire was trying to tell me something. About you. About who should have been here all along." That night, as Maya prepared Bryce's bedtime bottle, she felt a new weight settle in her chest. Claire had chosen her. Even in silence, even in death, this woman, this stranger, had tried to build a bridge. She thought of the hostility in Grace's voice, the cold looks from the staff, the slap that still echoed in her bones. And she thought, no one gets to rewrite my place here. Later, while checking on Bryce, Maya found something odd, an old toy rattle with the initials EM carved into the wood. It was unlike the others in the room. Worn, hand-painted, and clearly loved. She took it downstairs to the butler, Mr. Halford, a wiry man in his 60s with a stony face and eyes that saw everything. "Do you know whose this was?" she asked. Halford took the rattle, eyes narrowing. "This belonged to Edward, Arthur's older brother." Maya blinked. "Arthur has a brother?" "Had," Halford corrected. "Edward died when he was 6, drowned in the estate pond. Tragic." She tilted her head. "I didn't see a grave." "There isn't one," Halford said, lowering his voice. "Family covered it up. His mother never forgave herself. Claire never talked about it." Maya's instincts buzzed. The rattle, the name, the missing chapter. And then she asked, "Did Claire ever go near that pond?" Halford hesitated. "Sometimes. She'd walk there alone, just stand, looking." Maya stared at the rattle in her hand. There were ghosts in this house, and not all of them stayed in the past. That night, as thunder rumbled low in the distance, Maya wrote in her journal by the glow of a small desk lamp. Claire knew. About me. About something else. Something deeper. Bryce isn't just a child caught in grief. He's the key to a legacy full of secrets. She paused, tapping the pen lightly. And this house, this family, they're not just mourning the dead. They're hiding them. She closed the journal, set it in her drawer, and locked it. Tomorrow, she would visit the pond, alone. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't knock on doors. Sometimes, it whispers beneath the water. The walls of this golden prison. At dawn, while the estate still slumbered and the sky bled pale gold over the treetops, Maya slipped out through the kitchen door. She wore a thick cardigan and sturdy shoes, the old rattle with the initials EM tucked in her pocket. A light mist curled across the grass, wrapping the grounds in a ghostly hush. The pond lay beyond the hedges, past the orchard, hidden behind a veil of wild rose bushes and birch trees. It wasn't mentioned in the estate's blueprints. It wasn't visited during garden tours. But it was there still, dark and forgotten. She found it easily. It sat in a shallow hollow, water black and unmoving. A rotting bench leaned crooked near the bank, half sunken into the mossy earth. Dragonflies hovered over the water, wings catching the light like stained glass. Maya stood at the edge, heart thudding, eyes scanning the still surface. It didn't look like a place where a child once drowned. It looked like it had been waiting. She pulled the rattle from her pocket. The wood was smooth from decades of handling. She turned it over in her fingers, then glanced toward the trees. "Claire," she whispered, "why did you bring me here?" The breeze shifted, and with it came the faintest creak of the old bench. Maya sat slowly, letting her eyes drift across the pond. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, watching, holding its breath. Then she noticed the stones. Just beneath the surface, near the center of the pond, Something geometric shimmered. Maya stepped forward cautiously, squinting. It looked like a foundation? A square structure submerged, just beneath the murky surface. She crouched by the water's edge, her fingers brushing the damp moss. That was no accident. Someone had built something here long ago. Then, deliberately, it had been flooded. She stood, unsettled. As she turned to leave, her foot struck something hard. She looked down and kicked gently at the dirt. A piece of stone peeked through. She knelt, brushing it clean with her sleeve. It was a marker. Faint, worn lettering, nearly erased by time and rain. Edward Moore, beloved son, 1972, 1978. Her breath caught. The grave was here, hidden, alone. Suddenly, everything clicked. The secrecy, the whispers, Eleanor's guilt, Arthur's silence. This child, Arthur's older brother, had not just drowned. He'd been erased. Back at the house, Maya moved quickly through the back corridors. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she felt something pressing, urging her forward. The rattle still sat in her coat pocket like a talisman, warm from her palm. In the library, she found an old family photo album wedged between two forgotten encyclopedias. She flipped through pages of staged portraits, birthdays, weddings, business galas. But Edward appeared only once, as a baby in Claire's arms, once standing beside Arthur, both boys in matching suits. Then, nothing. She frowned. Even in the wealthiest families, children weren't just deleted from memory. She was still flipping pages when Eleanor entered quietly behind her. "You found him," the older woman said softly. Maya turned, startled. "The grave," Eleanor continued. "You went to the pond." Maya nodded, slowly closing the album. "Why was he buried there?" Eleanor sighed, walking to the window. "Because my husband was a man who believed weakness should be hidden. Edward wasn't like the other boys. He was delicate, sensitive. There were whispers back then about his behavior, his speech, his tendencies. Words like defective were used. My husband couldn't bear it." Maya's chest tightened. "So he was kept out of sight." "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice brittle. "Claire fought for him, but by then the silence had already taken root, and when he drowned, we buried him in shame." Maya's jaw clenched. "That wasn't his shame to carry." "No," Eleanor agreed. "It was ours, and it haunts this house." They stood in silence for a long moment. "Claire used to sit by that pond every morning," Eleanor said at last. "She called it her penance." Maya took a breath. She left the rattle. Eleanor nodded. "And you found it?" Later that evening, Arthur stood in the nursery watching Maya feed Bryce. Her arms moved with instinct, her voice low and soothing. The boy's eyes fluttered with sleep. There was a calm in the room that Arthur hadn't felt since Claire died. "I owe you the truth," he said suddenly. Maya looked up. "About Edward. About everything." "I already know," she replied, "or enough of it to understand." Arthur exhaled. "When I was a boy, I used to sneak out to see him. My father forbade it, but Edward, he was kind. He taught me how to fold paper cranes. He used to hum lullabies. He was light in a very dark house." He looked down, his voice tight. "And when he died, no one mourned him properly. They just buried the memory." Maya nodded. "Claire tried. She left breadcrumbs." Arthur met her gaze. "And you followed them." There was another pause. Then Maya said softly, "Bryce deserves better than ghosts. He deserves a family that doesn't bury the parts that hurt." Arthur crossed the room and gently took his son from her arms, cradling him. "He will," he said, "because of you." Maya hesitated. "What happens now?" Arthur looked at her, his voice resolute. "We bring Edward back into this house. We speak his name, we honor him, and we start doing what we should have done years ago." "And the staff?" Maya asked. "The judgment? The whispers?" "They'll learn," Arthur said, "or they'll leave." Maya nodded, lips pressed tight. Then she said something that surprised even her. "Let me help you do it." Arthur blinked. "You're staying?" "Yes," she said. "But this isn't just about care, it's about truth." A long beat. Then Arthur smiled, genuine, tired, and full of something Maya hadn't seen before. Hope. As the rain began to fall outside, the nursery became more than a room. It became a beginning. For Bryce, for Edward, for Maya, and for a man trying to rewrite the sins of his past. The next morning, a storm rolled over the estate, drenching the lawns and shrouding the mansion in gray mist. Maya stood at the breakfast counter, stirring oatmeal on the stove. Bryce sat in his high chair, babbling between spoonfuls of mashed banana, his face smeared with sunshine and mischief. Arthur entered, freshly shaven, carrying a folder in one hand. "We start today," he said. Maya glanced up. "Start what?" "Redemption," he replied, sliding the folder onto the table. "A memorial for Edward, official, public. He won't be forgotten again." Maya looked at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "It's overdue." They sat down together after breakfast and reviewed Claire's old notes, the few childhood photos they'd salvaged, and the handwritten letter she had once left hidden in a poetry book. In it, Claire had written, "The shame is not in who Edward was. The shame is in our silence." Arthur read it aloud, his voice cracking at the final line. He cleared his throat. "We'll commission a plaque, hold a small gathering." Eleanor said she'd speak. Maya rested her fingers lightly on the page. "And the pond? We'll restore it," he said. "Clean it up, put a proper stone there." Claire would have wanted that. As they worked, Maya noticed something else. Arthur was changing. The sharpness in his manner was softening, the rigidity in his spine easing. The guilt had weathered him for years, but now, it seemed, purpose was smoothing over the cracks. But not everyone welcomed change. Later that afternoon, Maya passed Grace in the hallway. The maid stood near the linen closet, arms crossed, a smug smile playing on her lips. "I heard there's going to be a ceremony," Grace said lightly. "Funny. I thought dead secrets stayed buried." Maya met her eyes. "Edward deserves peace." "Edward's gone," Grace hissed. "But you're not. And some people think you're getting too comfortable." Maya stepped forward, her voice low. "If you know something, say it. Otherwise, stay out of my way." Grace scoffed. "You think being close to that baby makes you untouchable. But you're just another help with a sob story. Don't forget your place." "I didn't forget," Maya replied calmly. "I just never accepted the one you tried to put me in." Before Grace could respond, a door creaked open nearby. Eleanor emerged from her parlor, gaze landing on both women. Her expression was unreadable, but her words were clear. "Grace," she said, voice like a gavel, "I think the linens can wait. Go check the silver in the dining hall." Grace hesitated, then stormed off. Eleanor turned to Maya. "Don't let the snakes distract you. They hiss loudest when they're afraid." Maya smiled faintly. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Eleanor said. "But don't thank me until the ceremony's over. Some ghosts don't like being disturbed." That night, after Bryce had been bathed and tucked into bed, Maya wandered the halls. The storm had passed, leaving behind streaks of moonlight on the polished floors. She carried Claire's poetry book under her arm, unsure why but drawn by a feeling. She paused outside Claire's study. The door was ajar. Inside, the room glowed with soft lamplight. Eleanor sat at the desk, flipping through an old ledger. Maya knocked lightly. "I didn't mean to intrude." Eleanor glanced up. "Come in. You should see this." Maya stepped closer. Eleanor turned the ledger toward her. It wasn't Claire's handwriting this time, it was the late Mr. Moore's, scrawled notes, dated columns, and one page circled in red ink. Maya squinted. "What am I looking at?" Eleanor tapped the page. "Payments. To a private clinic. Monthly. For 7 years. After Edward's death." Maya's eyes widened. "That doesn't make sense." It does," Eleanor said grimly. "If he didn't die." Maya stared at the page. "Are you saying Edward might be alive?" Eleanor folded her hands. "Or someone was being paid to say he wasn't." The revelation slammed into Maya like cold water. She looked down at the rattle, now permanently tucked in her coat pocket. The initials. The hidden grave. The sealed records. It all seemed less like tragedy and more like cover-up. "Why would they fake his death?" she asked. "Shame," Eleanor said, "and control. My husband didn't want a blemish on the Moore name. But Claire, she may have moved him, hidden him, kept him safe. That would explain the payments, the secrecy." Maya's hands trembled. Eleanor said gently, "We need to find out where the money went." And who cashed the checks? Maya nodded slowly. I'll help. Eleanor gave a rare, wistful smile. Good, because the walls in this house, they're starting to talk, and I think they're talking to you. Later, in the quiet of her room, Maya sat at her writing desk and opened her journal. There is a line between what we remember and what we hide. Today, I crossed it. The dead may not always be dead, and justice may still have a path. She tapped the pen, her breath steadying. If Edward is out there, someone knows, and I intend to find them. She closed the journal and whispered into the still air. Claire, if you're guiding me, don't stop now. The house creaked in response. Outside, the wind picked up, and somewhere beneath the surface of years of silence, the truth stirred ready to rise. The next morning, the estate pulsed with subtle tension. Staff moved with more restraint, whispers curled in corners like smoke, and the weight of unsaid truths made the air feel thick. Maya could feel it in every room she passed. The walls knew, and they were tired of keeping quiet. In Claire's study, Arthur joined Maya and Eleanor just after sunrise. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, a sign that he was done with denial. Eleanor had printed copies of the ledger pages from the previous night and placed them on the table, beside a pot of fresh coffee. Arthur scanned the page with furrowed brows. You're certain these payments continued after Edward's death? Maya answered for Eleanor. Same amount, same recipient code, but the bank account traces to a small private facility in upstate New York, one specializing in behavioral rehabilitation and trauma therapy. Arthur sank into the leather armchair. Claire must have placed him there. Eleanor nodded. And your father let her so long as it stayed off the record. Maya pushed forward. We need to find out if he's still there, or if he was ever there. Arthur stood abruptly. I'll call my attorney, quietly, if he's alive. Eleanor's voice cut in, firm and low. If he's alive, Arthur, you don't get to decide what happens next. Claire chose to protect him. You'll need to do more than discover him. You'll need to earn him. Arthur didn't argue. His silence was agreement. That afternoon, while Eleanor contacted the clinic under the guise of a historical family inquiry, Maya took Bryce for a walk across the grounds. The boy giggled in his stroller, pointing at birds, leaves, and passing clouds as if he were naming stars. Maya felt a strange calm in her chest. She had no certainty of what they'd find, but something deep within her whispered that she was where she needed to be. As they reached the edge of the orchard, a voice called from behind, "You don't belong here." Maya turned to find Grace standing by the gate, arms folded, eyes cold. You've been stirring things up, Grace continued, digging through graves, turning Arthur against his own blood. Maya stepped between the stroller and Grace instinctively. I'm helping this family heal, something you clearly have no interest in. Grace scoffed. Heal or replace? Don't think we don't see it. You, with your careful voice and wounded eyes, pretending you're the savior, but you're just convenient. Maya's expression didn't change. If truth makes you uncomfortable, maybe you're standing on the wrong side of it. Grace stepped closer. You should have stayed in your place. And what place is that? Maya asked quietly. The one that doesn't rewrite family history. Just then, Eleanor's voice rang out behind them. Grace. The older woman stiffened. Eleanor approached slowly, her cane tapping the stones. You've said enough. Maya has more dignity in one finger than you've shown in 30 years. Grace's face twisted, but she said nothing. She turned and stormed back toward the house. Eleanor sighed. Snakes, still slithering. Maya chuckled softly. At least they hiss loud enough to hear. Later that evening, a phone call came from the clinic. Arthur took it in the drawing room, hands shaking slightly. When he returned to Maya and Eleanor, his face was pale, eyes wide. They confirmed he was admitted under the name Edward Graves, Arthur said. Same birth date, same photo Claire gave them. He was there for 19 years. And now? Maya asked. Arthur swallowed. He left 6 years ago. Voluntarily. No forwarding address. But they say he was gentle, kind, quiet. They kept a journal he wrote in. It's locked in storage. They'll release it if we come in person. Eleanor sat down heavily. So he might be anywhere. Arthur nodded. Maya stood. Then we go find the journal. The next morning, Arthur and Maya boarded a small charter plane bound for New York. Eleanor stayed behind with Bryce, watching from the terrace with a hand on the child's shoulder as the car disappeared down the estate drive. Arthur said little during the flight. Maya read quietly, but her mind buzzed with questions. Who had Edward become? Did he know he'd been loved? Did he even remember them? The clinic sat on a quiet hill, surrounded by pine trees and shrouded in fog. It was modest, old-fashioned, its brick exterior softened by ivy and time. A nurse named Carol met them at the gate. "He was our most polite resident," she said warmly, never raised his voice, spoke softly, painted landscapes. She led them to the archives room, where an assistant retrieved a small cedar box. Inside was a weathered journal, its cover hand-stitched with a simple tree. Maya opened it gently. The handwriting inside was delicate, slanted, and precise. "Today I remembered a song, my mother's voice. I can't remember the words, but I remember her laugh when I got them wrong." She turned the page. "There was a girl at the pond once. She had red shoes. She told me not to cry when I slipped, that I was brave." Arthur inhaled sharply. "That was Claire," he whispered. "She always wore red flats by the pond." Maya flipped further. The entries became sparse, lonelier. "I wonder if they remember me, or if I'm just a shadow in someone else's house." She closed the journal slowly. "He's out there," Maya said. "Somewhere." Arthur nodded. "And we're going to find him." She met his eyes. "No," she said. "We're going to bring him home." The wind cut sharper upstate. As Arthur and Maya drove through quiet backroads flanked by red barns and fields gone gold with fall, the weight of the journal sat between them like a third passenger. Each page had peeled back a layer of a man once erased, now slowly returning from the fog of silence. They returned to the city, and with Eleanor's help, hired a private investigator, a quiet, well-dressed man named Reuben Hale, whose specialty was tracking down long-lost family. Over coffee in the estate's conservatory, Reuben set down the worn leather briefcase that never left his side. "I don't promise miracles," Reuben said, "but your brother didn't just vanish. People leave traces, patterns, choices." Maya handed over the journal. "Start here." For 2 weeks, the estate settled into an odd rhythm. Arthur resumed managing the business remotely. But his late nights were now filled with long walks and hesitant talks with Eleanor. Maya took charge of the nursery, of Bryce, and quietly sorted through the lingering pieces of Claire's old storage trunk, searching, always searching. Then, one rainy Thursday morning, the call came. Reuben's voice was calm but electrified. "We've found someone." Maya sat up straight on the edge of the couch. "Where?" "Pennsylvania. A man going by the name Eli Garrison. Lives in a small apartment above a used bookstore. Paid in cash. Keeps to himself. Teaches children how to paint at the local community center." Arthur, who had been standing nearby, dropped his cup. "It's him? He has no legal records before 2001, Reuben said, but his handwriting matches the journal. 3 days later, Maya and Arthur stood across the street from Page and Willow, a brick bookstore with ivy creeping up its sides. Through the rain-speckled glass, they saw a man arranging canvases behind the counter, tall, thin, gray at the temples. He moved with deliberate gentleness. He wore a cardigan with a torn cuff and sneakers that looked older than Bryce. Arthur's voice cracked. "I don't know if I can do this." Maya touched his arm. "You must." They crossed the street. Inside, the bell over the door chimed softly. The man turned. For a moment, nothing passed between them except time. Then Arthur whispered, "Edward?" The man blinked. His eyes, bright blue and searching, settled on Arthur's face. I haven't heard that name in decades." Arthur stepped forward, trembling. "I'm your brother." The man, Edward, Eli, whoever he had become, looked stunned. He reached out as if afraid the moment would break. "I thought you all forgot." Maya watched the scene with tears prickling behind her eyes. The air shimmered between the men like something sacred, recognition without words, reunion born from silence. Arthur said, "Claire left me clues. She never stopped loving you." "Ah." Edward's lips trembled. "She saved me. Took me away before the doctors did what Father wanted. She found people who hid me, protected me. I took a new name, lived quiet, safe." Maya stepped forward. "She left a trail for us. And now, she brought you back." Edward looked at her. "You're the one from the journal." She blinked. "What?" You came to the pond. I saw you there, holding my rattle. Arthur stared between them. How? Edward smiled faintly. You think I left without ever looking back? Number I returned. A few years ago. I stood by the pond. I saw her grave. And then I saw you. You looked like someone who could carry a truth. Maya covered her mouth with her hand. Edward continued. But I didn't think you'd ever come this far. Arthur stepped forward again. Will you come home? Edward looked around at the little bookstore. I built peace here. But your name, Arthur said, deserves to live again. A long pause. Then Edward nodded slowly. I'll come. For Claire. And for the boy. Arthur blinked. Bryce? Edward's smile deepened. He looks just like she did when she was little. The same eyes. Arthur didn't speak. He only moved forward. And the two men embraced 40 years of silence, collapsing into one trembling, tearful moment. Back at the estate, Eleanor stood on the terrace with Maya. Bryce toddled through puddles, giggling. They're on their way, Maya said. Eleanor closed her eyes. Then this house will be whole again. The car arrived at dusk. Edward stepped out slowly. He wore a coat too thin for the cold, and Maya immediately took it upon herself to fetch a warmer one from the hall closet. Eleanor met him on the steps. Her voice shook. You look just like your father did. But gentler. Edward smiled. And you haven't changed at all. They hugged tightly. Arthur came to Maya's side as she watched them. You brought us back something we didn't know we needed. No, Maya said quietly. Claire did. As night settled and the fire roared in the grand hall, Edward sat beside Eleanor and Arthur, Bryce asleep in Maya's lap. Stories began to rise, memories long buried. It wasn't a perfect reunion, but it was real. And sometimes, that was enough. The house, once echoing with secrets, now murmured with life again. Edward's presence sent a subtle ripple through every room. Staff treaded softer. Eleanor smiled more easily, and Arthur seemed less burdened, even in silence. But peace, Maya knew, was never free. It came at the cost of confrontation, and the ghosts of the past rarely went quietly. On the second morning of Edward's return, Maya woke early. The sky outside was thick with fog, the kind that blurred the edges of truth. As she made her way down the grand staircase, she found Edward already seated in the library, leafing through an old photo album with shaking hands. He looked up and smiled. I forgot how many faces we used to know. Maya sat across from him. Time buries so much. Edward closed the book. But not everything stays buried, does it? Maya tilted her head. Is there something you're not telling me? He hesitated. There's something I overheard. Years ago, right before Claire took me away. Maya leaned in. Father, he didn't just want me gone. He wanted everything that could connect me to the family gone. There were letters Claire had written to a reporter, a friend she trusted, trying to expose how Edward Moore Sr. had threatened doctors to classify me as unstable. She was going to go public. Maya's eyes widened, but nothing ever surfaced. Edward nodded. Because someone stopped it. I believe those letters were intercepted. By whom? I don't know, but Claire told me to trust only Eleanor if something ever happened. She said Eleanor knew more than she let on. Later that morning, Maya found Eleanor on the back patio, sipping tea, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Bryce toddled nearby, chasing a wind-blown leaf with single-minded joy. Eleanor, Maya began gently, what do you know about Claire's attempt to go public? The older woman didn't flinch. I warned her not to. Told her the family would tear itself apart before it admitted to what it had done. Did you help hide her letters? Eleanor's expression turned stern. But I helped hide her. After your son died, you understood what it meant to grieve in silence. Claire was grieving long before that for the brother they tried to erase. Maya's voice lowered. Edward thinks someone close stopped her. Eleanor sighed. Your instincts are right, but be careful. The rot in this house isn't just in the past. It breathes. That afternoon, Arthur called a family meeting in the drawing room. The air was tense. Bryce had been put down for his nap, and the only sound in the room was the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Arthur stood, facing Eleanor, Maya, and Edward. I've decided to amend the family trust, he said. Edward's name will be restored. His inheritance will be reinstated. Eleanor nodded. Edward looked down. Maya said nothing. Grace, standing near the hallway door with a tea tray, froze for just a second too long. Maya caught it. Arthur continued. And Maya, should she choose to remain, will be appointed as guardian to Bryce in the event of my death. Legal. Final. A clatter cut through the room. The tea tray hit the floor. Grace stood, eyes wide with something between shock and rage. I knew it, she hissed. Everyone turned. You brought her here, let her nurse your son, dig up graves, rewrite history so you could replace us? Arthur's voice was cold. Grace, you were never family. Oh, but I was closer than she'll ever be. Grace spat, her voice shaking. Ask her what she found in the attic. Ask her about the letters. Maya stood. You knew. Grace's eyes darted. Claire trusted me once. Then she started asking too many questions. Writing things down. I had no choice. You destroyed them, Maya said. No, Grace said slowly. I hid them. The room held its breath. Why? Eleanor asked, almost gently. Grace's voice cracked. Because they would have destroyed everything. You think this house runs on truth? It runs on silence. Arthur stepped forward. You're done here. Leave this house. Grace laughed bitterly. Throw me out, but it won't change who you are, or who your father was. She turned on her heel and stormed out. The front door slammed seconds later. Maya turned to Arthur. We have to find those letters. Edward spoke, his voice small. She mentioned the attic. That evening, Maya and Edward climbed the narrow servant's stairwell that led to the third-floor attic. The door creaked open to reveal dust, old trunks, and the scent of forgotten years. They dug through boxes for over an hour, holiday decorations, yellowed linens, antique photo frames. Then Maya spotted a hollow panel behind an armoire. She pried it open. Inside was a small tin box wrapped in velvet. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Letters, dozens of them, all signed by Claire, all written in the final months before she disappeared from public view. She read one aloud. To the editor of the Philadelphia Tribune, my name is Claire Moore, and I have evidence that my father attempted to declare my brother legally insane to protect his legacy. This letter may be the first of many. Maya's throat tightened. Edward sat beside her, tears streaming down his cheeks. She fought for me, he whispered, even when I didn't know it. Maya held the letters to her chest. And now we fight for her. They climbed down the attic stairs together, the box of truth cradled between them. The house was no longer silent. It was finally ready to speak. The sun rose heavy and orange over the Moore estate, casting long shadows through the study windows as Maya laid Claire's letters out across the oak desk. She worked carefully, fingers gloved, each envelope fragile but alive, an archive of one woman's relentless defiance against silence. Edward stood at her side, arms crossed, eyes never straying far from the papers, as if still trying to convince himself that they were real. Arthur entered, still buttoning the cuffs of his shirt. Eleanor told me you found them. We did, Maya replied without looking up. And they're everything Claire tried to say. Everything she tried to protect. He stepped closer and picked up a letter addressed to a now defunct local paper. His mouth tightened as he read. This one outlines how your father paid off a psychiatrist to sign Edward's commitment order. Edward's face darkened, but he said nothing. And this, Maya added, holding up another page, lists names, doctors, aides, even a nurse who tried to speak up and was fired days later. Claire was documenting a system, not just one injustice. Arthur sat heavily in the nearby armchair. Then we publish it. Edward raised his eyebrows. Just like that? Arthur nodded. I have friends in the media who've been waiting for a reason to stop pretending my father was some untouchable saint. But what about the family name? Maya asked. The company? I'd rather be remembered for making this right, Arthur said, than die protecting a lie. Maya exchanged a look with Edward. We'll need help organizing this. Scanning, authenticating, cross-referencing. I've already called Reuben, Arthur replied. He'll be here within the hour. As the day passed, the estate transformed into a command center. The dining room became a war room lined with charts, notes, and photographs. Reuben arrived with a laptop and a portable scanner, and quickly set up a workflow with Maya. Edward took breaks often, pacing by the windows or walking the grounds, as if reconnecting to the land he'd once belonged to. By evening, Maya had compiled the bulk of Claire's archive into a digital folder. Reuben clicked through them silently. "This," he said finally, "is not just a personal story, it's systemic. And you're sitting on a historical record, but be ready. Once this goes public, people will come for blood." Arthur looked over from the bar, glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. "Let them. We have the truth." Reuben nodded. "Then you'll need a partner in the press who'll handle it with care." I know just the person," Maya said. "Someone Claire once trusted." 2 days later, they met with Camille Price, an investigative journalist for the Philadelphia Chronicle. She was a tall, composed woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an empathetic demeanor. She arrived at the estate and was given a private briefing in the library. Camille listened to Maya's summary, then pored through the scanned letters and transcripts. After an hour, she closed the laptop slowly. "This is massive," she said, "and heartbreaking. You're exposing not only a personal injustice but a generational silencing." Edward sat on the edge of his seat. "So you'll do it?" Camille nodded. "But it has to be your voice. I can write it, but the world needs to hear from the people who lived it." Arthur agreed. "We'll give statements. And the documents. You do the rest." That night, Maya returned to her room, exhausted. Bryce slept peacefully nearby in his crib, the sound of his breath like soft waves. She sat at the edge of her bed and opened her journal, pen poised above the page. She wrote, "Claire, we found your voice, and we're going to make sure the world hears it." A knock at her door startled her. It was Eleanor. "May I?" the older woman asked, stepping in with a tray of tea. Maya smiled. "Of course." Eleanor poured 2 cups and sat. "You've brought this house back to life, you know." I didn't do it alone." "No," Eleanor agreed. "But you were the one who refused to let it stay silent." Maya looked over at Bryce. "Sometimes, the truth is louder than we think. We just have to give it breath." Eleanor raised her teacup. "To breath, then, and to voices that rise." By the end of the week, Camille's article was ready. It was titled, "The Forgotten Son: How One Woman Defied a Dynasty to Save Her Brother." The preview alone went viral. Major networks called. Advocacy groups reached out. Former hospital staff submitted affidavits. The Moore legacy cracked wide open. Arthur received a call from the board of his company. Investors demanded explanations. But instead of backing down, he released a press statement acknowledging the story and pledging to donate part of the company's earnings to mental health justice initiatives. At a press conference, Arthur stood beside Edward, Maya, and Camille. "I can't change the past," Arthur said into the microphone, "but I can shine a light on it. Claire Moore was not just my sister, she was a protector, a truth teller, and a legacy we will now honor." Reporters snapped photos. Edward didn't speak, but he held his head high. Maya stood beside them, calm, resolute. Claire's voice had finally found the air, and the world was listening. The courthouse buzzed with a tense, hushed energy. Outside, protesters gathered behind barricades, holding signs that read, "Justice for Edward," and "Silence no more." Media vans lined the block, antennas raised like flags in a storm. Inside, the marble halls echoed with footsteps and murmurs as people filed into the gallery. Maya stood beside Edward in the hallway, helping him adjust his tie. He hadn't worn one in years, but today was not a day for comfort, it was a day for confrontation. "You okay?" she asked softly. Edward nodded, but his hands trembled. "I never thought I'd live to see this moment. I thought I'd die a ghost." "Not anymore," Maya said. "Today you're heard." Arthur approached, dressed in a dark navy suit, his face stoic but unreadable. "Our lawyers are inside. We're not suing the hospital for money, we're suing to force them to release sealed records and make a public apology. That's what Claire would have wanted." Edward nodded again, his eyes misting. As the bailiff called for court to begin, Maya squeezed Edward's hand. "Let's finish what Claire started." The courtroom was a sea of suits, microphones, and piercing stares. The Moore legal team sat at one table. Across from them, the hospital's lawyers and administrators shifted uncomfortably. At the front, Judge Avery Carr, a stern woman in her 60s known for her intolerance of corruption, adjusted her glasses and banged her gavel. "Let it be known," she began. "This is not a trial of money but of memory, of justice delayed. Let us proceed." Arthur was the first to speak, taking the stand with calm dignity. My father, Edward Moore Sr., used power and privilege to silence a truth that embarrassed him, he said. He manipulated systems, people, and policies to erase his own son. This is not conjecture. We have letters, statements, and signatures proving a coordinated effort to label Edward as mentally unfit without legitimate cause. Gasps echoed in the gallery. The judge raised her hand for order. Arthur continued. We're not seeking revenge. We're seeking public acknowledgement. The world must know the truth. Next, Maya testified. She described discovering the journal, unearthing Claire's letters, and piecing together a life unjustly hidden. Her voice was steady. Her words clear. I'm not part of this family by blood, she said, but I have loved this child, Bryce, as if he were mine, and I have seen what silence does to a family. Claire didn't just fight for Edward. She fought for all the people the system tries to erase. Judge Carr leaned forward. And you believe this system still exists? Yes, Maya said, because Edward is not the only one. He was just the one lucky enough to have someone keep a record. The final testimony came from Edward himself. He stood with the help of a cane, not from weakness but to brace the weight of memory. My name was taken from me, he began. I was told I didn't belong, didn't matter, that I was defective, but none of that was true. My sister saved me. And now, my family is here, not to fix what was broken but to make sure it never happens again. He paused, his voice cracking. I forgive them, but I will not let them forget. The room held its breath. After a tense recess, Judge Carr returned with her decision. In light of the evidence and testimony presented, I order the full unsealing of the hospital's records regarding Edward Moore's false commitment. Furthermore, I direct the institution to issue a formal public apology within 30 days and to contribute to a new foundation established in Claire Moore's name, dedicated to advocating for mental health and ethical medical practices. Applause burst in the courtroom before the gavel silenced it. Edward sank back in his chair, tears sliding down his cheeks. Maya gripped his shoulder. Arthur exhaled, a long breath he seemed to have been holding for years. They had done it. They had spoken the truth, and the world had listened. Outside, the crowd erupted into cheers as the Moore family emerged. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Arthur stepped to the podium. We are not here as victims, he declared, but as witnesses to the power of truth. My sister Claire was silenced. Today, we speak not just for her, but for every family who has lost someone to a lie dressed in authority. He gestured to Edward. This is my brother, and I am proud to say his name. Edward stepped forward, unsure at first, but the roar of applause gave him strength. Thank you, he said simply. Then, hand in hand, they walked away from the courthouse into a world that finally knew their story. That night, back at the estate, the family gathered in the drawing room. The fireplace flickered softly. Bryce, now nearly 2, toddled from person to person, unaware that history had been rewritten that day. Eleanor raised a glass. To Claire, she said. To the woman who saw truth even when the world called her mad. To Claire, they echoed. Edward took Maya's hand. None of this happens without you. Maya shook her head. It was never about me. I just followed the light she left behind. Arthur turned to them both. And now it's our job to keep it burning. In the quiet that followed, the family sat together, not just restored, but remade. The wounds would never fully disappear, but they were no longer hidden. They were named, faced, owned, and in that truth, they found peace. In the weeks following the courtroom victory, the Moore estate became a symbol not of old money or private power, but of redemption. Reporters lingered less. The buzz around the case began to quiet. But within those walls, a different story was unfolding, one that couldn't be captured in headlines or press releases. Maya woke before dawn, unable to sleep. The house, though still, hummed with an undercurrent of change. In the nursery, Bryce stirred in his sleep, murmuring nonsense to the shadows. She gently touched his cheek and tucked the blanket closer around him. He had no idea what had been risked for his future. And perhaps that was the greatest gift. Downstairs, in the library, Edward sat alone, staring out the window. The morning mist hung low over the grounds. You're up early, Maya said. stepping in with 2 mugs of tea. Edward smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep. Feels like my mind's trying to process 30 years of silence all at once. She handed him a mug. You don't have to do it alone anymore. He looked at her, truly looked. That's what I keep forgetting. For so long, isolation was my default. Even now, it's hard to believe that I'm allowed to belong. You've always belonged, Edward. They just took the map away. He gave a hollow laugh. That's poetic. And painfully true. They sipped their tea in silence until Arthur entered, still in pajamas and robe. He seemed lighter now, as if shedding the family secrets had lifted a weight that generations had carried. Morning, he said. The Chronicle's editorial board called. They want to publish a follow-up interview. Edward raised an eyebrow. Again? Didn't they already do a 2-part exposé? Arthur shrugged. Apparently the public can't get enough of a redemption arc. But this time, they want you and Maya. Maya looked startled. Me? They think your perspective as the outsider, who became the compass of this family, adds something powerful. And they're not wrong. Edward hesitated. Do you want to? Maya looked out the window. I didn't come here to be seen, but if our story helps someone else speak up, then yes, I'll do it. Arthur nodded. Then it's settled. Later that day, Maya and Edward sat in the same study where weeks earlier they'd unearthed Claire's letters. A journalist named Iris Chen, soft-spoken but perceptive, set up her recorder and offered a reassuring smile. I know you've been through a whirlwind, she said. This isn't a rehash of the court case. I want to understand what comes after. Healing, legacy, family. Maya relaxed slightly. Edward folded his hands in his lap. Let's start with you, Edward, Iris said. What has life been like since the verdict? He considered his answer. Liberating. But strange. I spent most of my adult life trying to stay invisible. Now I'm being asked to exist in full view. It's like learning how to breathe again. And you, Maya? Iris turned. I came here to take care of a child, Maya said. I didn't expect to uncover a ghost. But now I realize Claire wasn't haunting this house, she was waiting for someone to finish what she started. Do you see yourself staying here? Maya nodded slowly. This place. It's not perfect. But it's changed. The people have changed. Bryce deserves to grow up in a home that knows how to tell the truth. Iris leaned in. And do you believe justice has been served? Edward spoke before Maya could. Justice isn't a destination. It's a decision. You choose it. Every day. By telling the truth. Even when it's hard. Especially then. Iris smiled, turning off the recorder. That's the quote. That evening, as the house settled into its quiet rhythm, Maya stood on the back patio watching the sunset. The horizon burned orange and gold, casting the old trees in silhouette. Bryce toddled across the grass chasing a butterfly. Arthur watched from a rocking chair, and Eleanor prepared lemonade inside. Edward joined Maya, hands in his pockets. I was thinking, he said, what if we opened part of the estate to the public, as a memorial space, for Claire, for people like her? Maya blinked, surprised. You'd share this place? He nodded. Not all of it, just the West Wing and the gardens. Set up an archive, a resource center, a place for people to learn, remember, and fight. She smiled. That's beautiful and brave. He chuckled. You're the brave one. I'm just catching up. They stood in silence as the sun dipped lower. Suddenly, Bryce stumbled and fell on the grass. Maya rushed over, but before she could lift him, he sat up and looked around, unfazed, then clapped his hands at a robin landing nearby. Edward laughed. That boy's got steel in his bones. He'll need it, Maya said softly. The world's not done changing yet. That night, Maya returned to her room and pulled out Claire's final letter, the one she hadn't shown anyone yet. It was addressed not to a paper or a friend, but to the one who finds this. She unfolded the page, hands trembling slightly. If you're reading this, it means the truth didn't die with me. Thank you for believing in it, for carrying it forward. If you've suffered, I hope my words help you find light. If you're privileged, I hope they make you listen. And if you're lost, I hope they guide you home. Maya closed her eyes, pressing the paper to her heart. I found you, Claire, she whispered, and I won't let you be forgotten. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. The night deepened, and within the walls of the Moore estate, the legacy of silence had finally been broken for good. The first frost of autumn painted the garden with silver threads. Leaves crunched underfoot as Maya made her way down the gravel path that curved through the western courtyard, soon to be the Claire Moore Memorial Garden. The name had been decided during a family meeting the week before, but it hadn't felt real until the morning sun spilled over the wrought iron arch newly installed at the garden entrance. Etched into the iron were Claire's initials, CM. Maya knelt beside a row of still-blooming roses, checking the soil and gently brushing away fallen leaves. The garden had become her morning ritual, a quiet place of reflection, a space where her heartbeat could settle. Claire had loved flowers. There were references in her letters to garden walks, and the peace they gave her in the years she watched over Edward from the shadows. Now, those same flowers stood as symbols of resilience. Behind her, the sound of slow footsteps approached. Maya didn't need to look up. She would have liked this, Edward said, his voice warm with memory. She would have insisted on marigolds, Maya replied with a small smile. I found a note about them in her journals, called them sunlight you can plant. Edward crouched beside her. We'll plant them tomorrow, right at the center. They worked in silence for a few minutes, arranging flower markers and smoothing the earth. Then Edward spoke again, this time hesitantly. I've been thinking about writing a book. Maya paused, brushing dirt from her gloves. About Claire? About everything. Her story, mine, ours. He glanced at her. I don't want people to remember us through second-hand articles. I want to give her the dignity of truth on our terms. I think it's a beautiful idea, Maya said, but only if you're ready. I'm terrified, he admitted. But maybe that's why I need to do it. She touched his hand gently. Then I'll help you, every step. Later that afternoon, the Moore estate hosted its first planning meeting for the public opening of the Claire Moore Memorial. Local community leaders, activists, and educators were invited, along with historians and representatives from mental health organizations. The room buzzed with quiet anticipation as Arthur stood at the front, tapping a folder against his palm. We're here not to commemorate a tragedy, he began, but to honor a legacy of truth-telling. My sister gave us a mirror. It's time we look into it. He gestured to the board where preliminary designs for the memorial stood on display, engraved quotes, timeline panels, a small library wing attached to the garden entrance. We're also launching a fund, he continued, for those pursuing mental health justice, and we want the space to be open to dialogue, lectures, storytelling, and healing. Maya stepped forward, holding a clipboard. Claire's voice will be the cornerstone, but we want the community's voice too. This place belongs to all who've been silenced. After the meeting, as guests mingled, an older woman approached Maya. She had silver hair pulled into a bun and a cane that clicked softly against the floor. You're the one who found the letters, she said, eyes moist. I knew Claire, years ago. We met at a church function. She was brilliant, but you could see the weight in her eyes. Maya nodded. She carried so much alone. I'm glad she's not alone anymore, the woman whispered. Thank you. In the weeks that followed, construction crews began reshaping the western garden. Workers cleared space for benches, pathways, and the small glass-fronted archive building. Maya often supervised, bundled in a coat and scarf, Bryce toddling beside her. Edward set up a writing space in the former sunroom, now transformed into his office. He spent hours dictating memories, transcribing Claire's journals, consulting Maya on tone, pacing, and truth. One afternoon, Maya found him asleep at his desk, head resting on a stack of papers. She didn't wake him, just draped a blanket over his shoulders and sat nearby, reading one of Claire's letters for what felt like the 100th time. It still moved her, still hurt, still healed. Then came a letter addressed to Maya, delivered by hand from a lawyer. It bore the seal of an estate executor. Maya opened it carefully, her hands trembling. It was Claire's will. Unbeknownst to anyone, Claire had changed her legal will shortly before her death, and in it, she had named Maya as the guardian of her legacy. The wording was simple, but clear. To Maya Williams, whom I have never met but have always hoped for, I entrust the story I could not tell. I trust you to carry it with grace, and to protect what I could not. You are, and always will be, family. Maya sat stunned, the paper blurring as tears welled in her eyes. She clutched it to her chest and whispered, "I won't let you down, Claire. I promise." She showed the letter to Arthur and Edward later that evening. They read it in silence, visibly moved. "She knew," Arthur said finally. "Even before we did." Edward placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. "Then it's only right that the first room in the archive is named after you." "No," Maya said firmly. "Name it for her, but let's put a plaque beneath it. Something simple, something she'd understand." They thought for a long moment before Arthur murmured, "How about this, for the one who listened?" Maya nodded, smiling through tears. "That's perfect." And as autumn deepened around the Moore estate, and the first of the marigolds began to bloom in the heart of the garden, something else blossomed too, healing, yes, but also a sense of permanence. The kind only truth could sow, the kind only love could tend. It began with a creak. Maya had walked the Moore estate for over a year now, but this sound, subtle and strange, had not been there before. She paused at the top of the servants' stairwell, in the east wing, where the late afternoon sun filtered through frosted windows. Bryce was down for a nap, Eleanor out at her book club, Edward in his writing den. She took a step back. There it was again, a low groan beneath the wooden floor. Not the usual complaint of an old house, but something deliberate, isolated. Maya knelt and pressed her ear to the planks. Faint as it was, the noise repeated 3 knocks, spaced out, like a forgotten memory tapping at the edge of consciousness. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Maya returned with a flashlight and screwdriver. She carefully pried up the corner board where the sound had come from. Dust billowed. Her beam caught something metallic. She reached down and pulled out a small tin box, its lid rusted shut. She hesitated, then forced it open. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, and a bundle of letters this time, in a man's handwriting. Edward's, but not the Edward she knew. The handwriting was dated, the tone younger, torn with desperation. Maya sat on the stairwell, reading by flashlight. Letter after letter, written in secret and never sent. Addressed to Claire, apologies, pleas, descriptions of loneliness, of medication-induced fog, of dreams about the garden, about the house, about her. And one letter, different. Its paper yellowed more than the rest, its handwriting shaking. It read, "If anything happens to me, know this I remember. I always did. They told me I was broken, but I wasn't. I was scared. And I kept quiet because I thought I had to. But I remember the night they took me. The man in the suit. The nurse with the red lipstick. The lie they called treatment. I remember, Claire. I remember you trying to stop them." The letter was signed, E.M. Maya's heart pounded. He hadn't been completely silenced. Some part of him had fought back, left a trace, a fingerprint in history's dust. The next morning, Maya showed Edward the letters. He read them with shaking hands. "I must have written these before the medication stole months of my memory," he murmured. "I think. Part of you tried to resist," Maya said, "and this is proof." They sat in silence, the tin box between them like a time capsule. Arthur joined them shortly after, reading in quiet disbelief. "We could use this," he said finally, "in the memorial, as a final chapter, a symbol of resistance even in captivity." Edward nodded. "Call it the whisper, because that's what it was, the whisper of truth trying to survive in the noise of lies." As winter approached, preparations for the grand opening of the Claire Moore Memorial entered their final stage. The garden, now golden with dried marigolds and winding ivy, looked serene but sturdy. The archive was finished glass walls, warm interiors, and displays that blended digital storytelling with personal artifacts. Maya curated the final exhibit, The Whisper. It stood alone in the last corridor, a reproduction of the tin box, the letters encased in glass, Edward's voice playing in the background reading excerpts of his younger self's pleas. Visitors would leave the exhibit in silence. Arthur took charge of the memorial's press campaign. The story had shifted from family drama to national discussion of institutional silence, of who gets believed and who gets buried beneath procedure. An op-ed written by Arthur and Maya together appeared in the New York Times. Its title was simple, Claire's Garden. The day of the opening dawned cold and clear. Guests from across the country arrived, scholars, survivors, advocates. Some had never met Claire, never heard of the Moore family, but had felt echoes of her pain in their own lives. Maya stood at the entrance, holding Bryce's hand, dressed in a dark navy coat with Claire's brooch pinned to her collar. Eleanor stood nearby, regal and quiet, her eyes scanning the crowd for ghosts and finding only peace. Edward approached the microphone on the garden's stone stage. He looked thinner now, but clearer, like someone who had finally stepped fully into the sunlight. "My sister was not perfect," he began. "She was angry, brilliant, unapologetically loud when it mattered most. And for that, they tried to silence her." He paused, scanning the crowd. They failed. Soft applause rose, restrained but deeply felt. Edward continued, "This garden is not for her alone. It is for every person who has been told they were too much, too broken, too loud. It is a place for whispers that refuse to die." He stepped back. Then Maya stepped forward, Bryce in her arms. "This little boy will grow up knowing his family's truth. Not just the polished one, but the raw, messy, painful one, because that's where real love lives in honesty." She looked up at the sky, where a flock of birds crossed the winter clouds. "And today, we choose to tell the truth, loud enough to be heard." A bell rang softly as the gates opened. Visitors stepped inside, passing plaques, flowers, letters, names. Some cried, some prayed, some just stood still, absorbing the weight of history reclaimed. And in the middle of the garden, beneath the largest tree, a new plaque had been placed. It read, "Claire Moore, she wasn't silent, she was silenced." And just beneath that, in smaller print, "And still, she spoke." Maya stood there long after the others moved on. Bryce reached for a flower. She knelt, letting him touch the petals. "See this?" she whispered to him. "This is what truth looks like." The boy smiled, then giggled, and somewhere, deep in the marrow of the garden, the whisper became a song. The memorial had been open for 2 weeks when the first anonymous envelope arrived. No return address, no stamp, just a cream-colored envelope with Maya's name penned in an elegant, old-fashioned script. At first, she thought it was a thank you card, another small token from one of the visitors touched by Claire's story. But when she opened it, her breath caught. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Claire, young and radiant, standing beside a man Maya didn't recognize. He was sharply dressed, tall, with a hawk-like face. On the back of the photo was one line, scrawled hastily, "You don't know everything. Come to the place where she first screamed." Maya sat down slowly on the library bench, heart racing. She turned the photo over again, studying the unfamiliar man. He looked familiar in that haunting way, like a face from a dream or a shadow from a forgotten story. She flipped it again to the cryptic message, "Where she first screamed." Maya didn't tell anyone right away. Not Arthur, not Edward. Something about the note felt personal, targeted. If it was a threat, it was subtle. If it was a warning, it was urgent. Either way, Maya needed answers before involving the others. That night, after putting Bryce to bed and making sure the house was quiet, Maya returned to the old estate blueprints stored in the archive. She pored over the layouts, tracing her fingers along the map of the East Wing, the wing that had been sealed for years. There, tucked between the original nursery and the servants' stairwell, was a room marked "Storage Converted 1961. She stared at the date, 1961, the same year Claire had been institutionalized. Maya found the old key ring in the estate's archive drawer and crept to the sealed east corridor. The hallway was colder than the rest of the house, as if the air hadn't moved in decades. Dust clung to the corners like memory. She slid the key into the lock. The door gave way with a groan. The room was small, almost claustrophobic. A single broken chair sat in the corner, and the wallpaper was torn in long, angry scratches. On the floor lay a child's hair ribbon, faded lavender, knotted with time. Suddenly, the air shifted. Maya turned. A figure stood in the doorway. An old man. Tall, hawk-like face. The man from the photograph. Her breath caught in her throat. "I see you found the room," he said. His voice was low, gravelly. She used to call it the box. "Fitting, isn't it?" "Who are you?" Maya asked, her voice steady despite the thundering in her chest. He stepped forward, eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his worn hat. "My name is Richard Vance. I worked for the family, long ago, before everything fell apart. You were in that photo with Claire. He nodded. She trusted me once, thought I could help, but I didn't. I couldn't. He moved slowly, sitting on the broken chair. The wood creaked under him like a confession. I was there the night they took her, he said. Watched from the hallway as they dragged her out. They said she was hysterical, said she needed help, but I knew the truth. She wasn't crazy. She was angry, righteous. Why didn't you stop them? Maya asked. Richard looked down. Because I was a coward, and because they paid me to keep quiet. Silence stretched between them. I'm not here for forgiveness, he continued. I'm here because you stirred something. The memorial, the truth, it's unfinished. What do you mean? There's another file, one no one knows about, locked away in the archives of St. Augustine's Sanitarium, the institution where they sent her. It contains doctor's notes, medication schedules, and a report written by a nurse who had doubts. She disappeared not long after. Maya's spine stiffened. And you're just telling me this now? I've been carrying it for years. Guilt ages you. I didn't have the strength to face it. But watching what you've done, what you've built, I knew someone had to carry the last piece. He pulled out a folded sheet from his coat pocket. It was a photocopy, an address, a time-stamped reference number. This is all I have. Maya took it silently, eyes scanning the page. If you go, Richard said, rising to his feet, be careful. Not everyone has forgotten Claire Moore. And not everyone is happy her story's being told. He turned and disappeared down the corridor before she could ask anything else. Maya stood alone in the room, the photo still in her hand, the dust swirling in the shaft of moonlight. The next morning, Maya called Edward and Arthur into the study. She laid out the photo, the letter, and Richard's note. Edward stared at the image. That man. I've seen him. Once. Years ago. Lingering outside Father's funeral. Arthur's jaw clenched. If this file exists, we need to find it, before someone else tries to bury it again. I'll go, Maya said. I want to see it with my own eyes. You won't go alone, Edward said firmly. Arthur nodded. We'll make a plan. Quiet, legal, no headlines. Maya looked down at the ribbon she'd taken from the floor the night before. Lavender, soft between her fingers. Claire's voice echoed in her memory. Don't let them forget me. She wouldn't. She couldn't, because now there was more than a garden at stake. There was still truth buried deep, and Maya Williams was not afraid to dig. The morning was gray when Maya and Edward arrived at the outskirts of Westbridge, Massachusetts, where St. Augustine's Sanitarium stood like a forgotten monument to pain. The building was a sprawl of red brick and weather-stained stone, partially abandoned, partially repurposed as a state-run mental health record archive. It smelled of mildew and time, the kind of place history tried to erase by burying it in bureaucracy. Maya clutched the referral document. Richard had given her an old medical record ID and a citation code. She had called ahead and arranged a private research appointment under her journalist credentials, leaving out the full story. Edward, posing as her legal aid, carried a briefcase filled with backup documents, just in case they needed to invoke public record access laws. A woman in her 60s greeted them at the front desk. Her name tag read, Carol. You're here for the Moore file? She asked quietly, as if even the name still carried weight. Yes, Maya replied. Claire Moore. We were told there might be personal notes in the restricted collection. Carol hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the security camera overhead, then to Maya's expression. Something in that gaze, equal parts fire and calm, moved her. Follow me, she said, standing. She led them down a long hallway lined with rusting filing cabinets. At the far end was a locked room with a reinforced door. Carol entered a code, scanned her badge, and ushered them inside. Rows of archived patient files stretched the length of the room, boxed and labeled in numerical code rather than names. She pointed to a table. I'll give you 30 minutes. Make copies discreetly. If anyone asks, I didn't let you see the nurse's journal. With that, she slipped out. Maya and Edward exchanged a look. Nurse's journal? He whispered. They searched quickly, following the old record ID, until they found the box. It was heavier than expected, filled with handwritten notes, typed reports, and several photographs, black and white, some blurred, all haunting. Maya flipped through the reports, each page more damning than the last. Claire's medication levels were triple standard dosage. There were notations about her uncooperative behavior, refusing to stay silent, questioning the staff, insisting that her brother's condition was induced rather than organic. Then Maya found it. A slim, leather-bound journal tucked between folders. She opened it. The first entry was dated July 1961. The handwriting belonged to a woman named Nurse Elaine Thatcher. The 3rd of July, 1961. I've been assigned to Miss Claire Moore. She arrived last night, sedated. She keeps saying she was forced here, that her family betrayed her. I want to believe she's delusional. But something in her eyes unsettles me. She's not broken. She's furious. Page after page detailed Claire's declining health, not from illness but from overmedication and isolation. Thatcher had questioned the attending physician's directives, Dr. Ronald Avery, but had been silenced. She had written of threats, of being watched. Then, abruptly, the journal stopped. The last entry, dated the 9th of September, 1961, read, "If anything happens to me, it will not be an accident. Claire is not crazy. She's a witness, and someone doesn't want her to speak." Edward clenched his fists. This is it. This is the proof. Maya took photos of every page, careful to document even the margin notes. She knew this wasn't just evidence, it was a lifeline, a bridge from Claire's silence to her legacy. Then footsteps echoed in the hallway. They froze. Voices, 2 men, unfamiliar. Edward quickly closed the box while Maya tucked the journal into her coat. The door opened. A tall man in a gray suit entered, followed by a younger assistant with a clipboard. The older man's badge read, Dr. Avery 3. Yes? He asked sharply, scanning the room. I was told someone was reviewing restricted files. We're with the Claire Moore Memorial Foundation, Edward replied smoothly, pulling out a document. Under Massachusetts law, Chapter 66, Section 10, we have right to access medical records of the deceased with direct family representation. Dr. Avery's eyes narrowed. That's quite a coincidence, given that my grandfather was the lead physician in this facility in the 62nd. Coincidence, Maya said evenly, is a gentle word for legacy. The man's smile was tight. I hope you're not implying impropriety. I'm not implying, she replied. I'm recording. Dr. Avery's face twitched, but he stepped back. Your time is up. Please leave the documents on the table. We've finished, Edward said, placing an unrelated folder down. Thank you for your hospitality. They walked out without another word. Only when they were in the car did Maya let out the breath she'd been holding. Did you see his face when I said recording? She said, grinning. I wasn't, but he doesn't know that. Edward laughed. You've got more fire in you than a courtroom prosecutor. Back at the estate, they uploaded everything to a secure drive and shared the files with Arthur, who sat in stunned silence as he read. This, he finally whispered, changes everything. They began drafting a public statement, careful, legally grounded. The plan was to release the journal alongside a special exhibit in the memorial, the locked wing. Maya stood in the doorway of Claire's garden that evening, staring up at the stars. The ribbon still in her coat pocket, the whispers now turning into undeniable voices. She thought of Elaine Thatcher, of the courage it took to write what she did, to risk everything for the truth. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that silence would never again win in this house. It was the eve of the new exhibit's launch when protesters arrived at the gate. Maya had been in the greenhouse with Bryce, showing him how to water the herbs Claire had once planted, when a call came from the front desk. There's a group here, about 20 people, signs, chants. They're not violent yet. She handed Bryce to Eleanor, who nodded without a word, and hurried out. Outside the memorial gates stood a mix of older men and women, many in suits, some in religious garb. One man stood at the front, holding a placard that read, Let the dead rest, no more slander. Maya recognized his face from a press clipping. Councilman Daniel Gresham, the grandson of a former St. Augustine's board member. They'd expected backlash. But not this soon. Miss Williams, Gresham called as she stepped forward. Are you the one spearheading this latest display of sensationalism? If by display you mean truth, Maya said, then yes. You have no idea what kind of legacy you're tampering with. Good people's names, Generations of work to heal the mentally ill smeared for what? A headline? No, Maya said, voice steady. For justice. For a woman who was silenced. For a nurse who disappeared for speaking out. For every person who was locked away for being inconvenient. Someone in the crowd yelled, "Shame." Maya didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the gate. You don't have to agree with the exhibit, but the facts are public now. And no protest, no councilman's badge, can unwrite history. Gresham's eyes narrowed. This won't be the last time we meet. I hope not, Maya said, because next time, I'll have a microphone. Inside, Arthur and Edward finalized the display panels for The Locked Wing. The exhibit began with a replica of the storage room Maya had discovered, complete with ambient whispers and flickering lights mimicking candle glow. It then led visitors into a digital timeline of Claire's stay at St. Augustine's, including scanned notes from Elaine Thatcher's journal, photographs of the sanitarium, and an interactive map of the restricted wing. At the center stood a sculpture, two hands, one clenched in a fist, the other reaching upward, emerging from cracked concrete. Below it, a plaque read, "The truth doesn't die in silence. It waits." Maya entered with Bryce after the protesters dispersed. She stood before the sculpture, holding her son's hand as he stared up at it, wide-eyed. "That's a strong lady's hands," he said. Maya smiled, blinking back tears. "Yes, baby, that's Claire." The launch night arrived with rain tapping at the windows like old memories. Guests filed in, umbrellas dripping, faces solemn but curious. The press was there too, quieter now, less sensationalist. Word had spread that this was more than a scandal, it was a reckoning. Edward gave the opening speech, his voice steady despite the weight of legacy pressing down on him. "We once called this the locked wing," he said. "Now, it's open. Not just the rooms but the wounds, and with that openness comes the chance to heal honestly." Arthur followed with a reading from Elaine's journal, his voice catching only once when she described Claire's laugh echoing through the halls, before they silenced her. And finally, Maya stepped up. "I came here as a maid. I found a child. I was nearly thrown out for doing what came naturally to a mother, but I stayed, because something told me the real story hadn't yet been told." She paused, looking around the room. "You can bury truth for a season, but not forever." Thunder rumbled softly above. After the ceremony, an elderly woman approached Maya. Her eyes were sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses, and she held a thin cane with a carved ivory handle. "You don't know me," she said, "but I knew Elaine Thatcher. She was my cousin." Maya blinked. "You did?" "She disappeared the year I graduated college. No one ever told me why, but I remember the last letter she sent. She wrote, 'I've seen things I can't unsee. I just hope someone listens one day.'" She reached into her purse and pulled out a small sealed envelope. "This arrived last week. No return address. Just my name." I opened it and found this inside. Maya unfolded the letter. It was a page torn from Elaine's journal, written in the same shaky hand. "They think they've erased her. But memory is soil, and the truth is seed. One day, someone will water it, and when it grows, it will crack the stone they've tried to hide behind." Maya closed her eyes for a long moment, letting the words settle in her bones. That night, long after the last guest left, Maya returned to the sculpture in the dimmed hall. She stood alone, save for the faint hum of the lights. She placed Elaine's letter into a glass case beneath the sculpture, one final edition. Then she whispered, "We remember." Behind her, Edward entered quietly. "You did it," he said. "You gave them voices." Maya turned to him. "Number, they already had voices. We just gave them back the microphone." Edward nodded. Outside, the rain eased, and inside, in the quiet of the memorial, the whispers finally rested, not silenced, but heard. Snow had begun to fall the morning. Maya woke to the soft sound of birds outside her window. The garden, now dormant in the quiet grip of winter, stretched out beneath a sheet of white, its edges blurred, softened by the frost. Claire's lavender bushes, trimmed and bundled before the first freeze, stood like sentinels in the stillness. Maya wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the back veranda. The cold air bit gently at her skin, but she didn't mind. There was something honest about winter, no pretense, no facade, just what was, and what remains. Inside, Eleanor was preparing breakfast, humming quietly to the rhythm of a life no longer marked by tension. Bryce sat at the table, drawing, his little brow furrowed in concentration. On the page, he'd drawn a house, a garden, and 3 people holding hands. A woman, a child, and another woman with a ribbon in her hair. "Who's this?" Maya asked, pointing. "That's Claire," he said proudly. "She's not gone, she's flowers now." Maya's heart twisted with an ache that felt like peace. Edward entered, carrying the morning paper. His face was unreadable as he handed it to her. "Front page," he said. The headline read, "Sanitarium Reckoning. Family Legacy Sparks Movement for Mental Health Transparency." Below it, a photo of Maya standing beside the locked wing exhibit, her hand resting gently on the glass case holding Elaine's final letter. The article detailed the memorial's impact, families reaching out, stories coming to light, lawmakers beginning to push for access to long-sealed institutional records. Claire's name had become more than a footnote in a tragic family history. She had become a symbol. Maya folded the paper slowly, her hands steady. Later that afternoon, a visitor arrived unannounced. He was middle-aged, with storm-gray eyes and a coat far too thin for the weather. He introduced himself as Thomas Avery, the grandson of Dr. Ronald Avery, the physician who had overseen Claire's internment. "I've come to say something," he said, "and to listen." They sat in the study, the fire crackling low between them. "My grandfather," he began, his voice tight, "was not a good man. He was meticulous, obsessive. He believed in order over truth. I grew up with his ghost hanging over our family name." Maya said nothing. She let him speak. "I found some of his notes after the exhibit opened, private letters. He knew she wasn't ill, that she'd threatened to expose what the family had done to her brother. He called her a liability." Thomas pulled out an envelope. "I don't want to carry his silence anymore. This belongs here." Maya accepted it quietly. When he left, she opened the envelope. Inside was a confession of sorts. A letter never sent, written in Ronald Avery's cursive. He detailed the manipulation of Claire's diagnosis, the pressure from family stakeholders, the payments, the threats. It was damning. She handed it to Edward that evening. "We'll add it to the archive," he said. "Let it stand beside Elaine's words. Let them speak together." The week passed quietly. Visitors came, drawn by word of mouth, by the quiet power of truth told without spectacle. They brought letters, photos, mementos of their own loved ones lost to silence. One woman wept at the sculpture, whispering, "My mother was there too. She never came home." An older man in a veteran's jacket left a folded flag at the garden gate, and a young nurse, just beginning her career, placed a single stethoscope under the plaque with Claire's name. "I want to remember what listening looks like," she said to Maya. On the final evening of the year, Maya stood in the garden once more. Snow crunched beneath her boots. Arthur joined her, his breath visible in the cold. "She changed everything," he said, gazing at the memorial lights glowing through the windows. "No," Maya said, "she planted the seed. We just watered it." They stood in silence for a long while. Then Arthur turned to her. "I want to fund a scholarship, for women like Elaine. For nurses who speak up." Maya nodded. "And I'll help build it, with Claire's name." As the clock struck midnight, soft chimes echoed from the town square down the hill. Fireworks bloomed in the distance, reflected in the frosted glass of the house behind them. Maya knelt and brushed snow from one of the garden stones. Claire's name was etched there, simple and strong. "Sleep well," she whispered. "You are not forgotten." Inside, Bryce ran through the hall, laughter trailing behind him like light. And in the heart of winter, a garden began to dream of spring.